got this book on Audible once I realized it was already published on Audible originally. And at the end of it, there was a review by the author, and interview with the author. One of the questions being asked to her was like how she created such creative characters, and I'm like, really? In this video, I'm going to be reviewing 3 different books that were given to me as ebooks as an advanced reader copy. 2 of these 3 have been published. I am falling behind. I have read all of, I think, 3 books now as of the 8th or 9th of April. It's not been a good reading month. All in all, they were all pretty good. I'm going to start from my least favorite to my most favorite. The first one I want to talk about is The Apartment by K.L. Slater. I gave this book 3 out of 5 stars. It was fine. I mean, it was a definition of mediocrity. That sounds so pretentious, but it's just the best way to describe it. I didn't actively dislike it. I mean, I was mildly interested all the way through. The problem is that's it. No more than mild interest, just enough to keep me interested in reading. If it wasn't for the arc review, I probably wouldn't have started in the first place. But even without that, I probably still would have finished it. It's like that level of good. Good enough to finish, but not great enough to praise. It's about this mother and her young 5-year-old daughter moving into this apartment that's supposed to be in the upper side of London that are supposed to be for rich people, and she's really poor. So she's like, why are they giving me this so cheap? She doesn't know why. And there are some allusions to supernatural stuff. I don't know if I can say it's predictable, because it's hard to say it's predictable when I wasn't interested enough in trying to predict it. I think I saw it coming, what came, but at the same time, I didn't put much thought into it because I didn't care that much where they were going. Honestly, the characters all seem so one-dimensional. This book comes out April 28th. I got this book on Audible once I realized it was already published on Audible originally. And at the end of it, there was an interview with the author. One of the questions being asked to her was like how she created such creative characters, and I'm like, really? No tea, no shade. These characters are kind of one-dimensional. You have the mother who's poor, blah, 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 and naive enough to fall into this obvious situation. A daughter who is just says daughtery things, no nuance. And then these other characters, the sweet old lady, this strangely nice but weird man, and his rude, pretentious other. And so weird stuff starts to happen. She tries to create like a creepy atmosphere. For me, it doesn't work. This is one of those books where, well, they set up this premise of, is it supernatural? And it's like, I'm pretty damn sure it's not supernatural. It's like there's no level of believability as a reader. Like I don't actually believe it's that kind of story. And for me, it wasn't creepy at all. It was more like, okay, what's going on? What's the secret? What's being hidden? And I won't say what all was being hidden. When it finally became revealed, it all happened so quick. The ending was just so abrupt. It was also just not that great. It's like, okay, this is the big reveal. Oh my god, this is so stupid. I don't care. Like I didn't even care enough to be critical of the logic of it, which I thought on just a very surface level interpretation wasn't very creative, but I solidly say that's not worth reading. It's just part of me wanted to give it less than a 3, but at the same time, I broke down my rating. You can see my Goodreads into different parts, and like the writing's not that bad. The plot isn't the end of the world. Like a 3 out of 5 stars, I feel like it's decent. Next up is going to be Still, a memoir of love, loss, and motherhood by Emma Hansen. And this was an e-arc provided me directly from the publisher at my request. It was actually, I think, the first and so far the only arc that has been provided to me directly from the publisher outside of NetGalley. And I'm very appreciative to them for that. I should start by saying this is a memoir about Emma Hansen's experience having a stillbirth, where her son died in the womb just a couple days before he was meant to be born. Naturally, this is a very heartbreaking, devastating story. It was published April 4th, 2020, and that was actually the anniversary of his stillbirth. I don't usually cry in books. This definitely made me cry on multiple occasions. There was at least one part, maybe a couple parts, where I had to stop because I wasn't able to focus because my mind was just racing on everything that was going on, and I couldn't keep up with the new stuff that was coming. But overall, this was a solid and it was a beautiful book. I'll start with why I didn't give it a full 4 stars. First off, Emma Hansen is a religious person. My point here isn't to critique her way of seeing life, but when it comes to dealing with loss like this, it definitely frames the way you see the world as a non-religious person, as someone who I think actually shares a very similar background to Emma Hansen, as we're being raised by very religious people, and remembering how that influenced my way of thinking. It's hard for me not to be a little uncomfortable with some of the mindsets around that. On top of that, she also talks about some natural cures that she approaches, and she actually actively says how she puts all her money into it, and that also makes me uncomfortable. Again, this isn't me trying to say, hey, your story is wrong, your story shouldn't be heard. This is her her story to be told, and I'm really grateful for the opportunity. When it comes to the content of it, those sections did just make me uncomfortable in a way that I have to say that from my perspective, it just wasn't as good of a book because of that. It sort of knocks it down by just maybe half a point. But overall, it was still beautifully written. And I should be clear, this book isn't a sermon, okay? And nor is it a self-help book on natural cures. These are just very small parts which naturally are to be expected. This is her story of loss, her trying to deal with that. And I wouldn't expect her not to include it. She actually starts off the memoir talking about how this is just her experience. Other people have very different experiences. That said, I get the impression that a lot of what she talks about is probably a shared experience. I obviously can't talk from personal experience. I've never had to go through this. The reason I chose to seek out this book, this memoir, was because someone I know had to go through a very similar devastating experience, and it made me want to better appreciate and understand this type of tragedy. I wasn't initially going to talk about that here, but it definitely affected my motivation to read it, my desire to read it, and just my act of reading it. That's part of the reason that I cried so much. The reason I'm deciding to share it now is that even though it's not my story, a big part of Emma Hansen's point here is to, one, let her son's name be heard, read, and let his story be heard. Let people become aware of how often this happens, and the fact that this does happen. It seems so easy for people to want to pretend like this isn't a real death. This isn't something that happens. She wants it to be acknowledged, and one, I am acknowledging that. I'm acknowledging that these do happen. She also wants her grief to be acknowledged. My point here is to say that, not to say that I am validating it, but rather that I feel for you. I recognize your grief, and to anyone who suffers through this, my heart breaks for you, even if I can't really appreciate what it is you've had to go through. So I'm going to leave it at that. God. Yeah, and it's a beautiful story. It's a beautiful but heartbreaking memoir, and I'm very appreciative of the opportunity to read it. I think I'll probably look into reading more literature in this area, because it's definitely something that even now I still feel like there's more for me to better appreciate and learn. It's honestly one of the toughest books I've had to read. 3.5 out of 5 stars. And lastly, let's talk about the book that I enjoyed most out of the set of 3 here. It's going to be Conjure Women by Afia Atakora. This book is a historical fiction magical realism book told from the perspective of this woman named, I want to say Rue, and her mother, I believe it was Mabel. And it basically alternates between just after the Civil War and just before the Civil War. Basically focused primarily on Rue's perspective in the beginning, and after the Civil War, and her mother's perspective before then. And we're basically seeing this narrative of their experiences as these conjure women, which are basically women whose responsibility is to provide medical aid to other slaves. A big part of their task, their job, seemed to be revolving around birth, and there's a lot of things about children and birthing in this story. At some point, there's a conflict between these conjure women and this up-and-coming preacher-type people who basically bring on Jesus. There's some conflict there, which I really liked. I liked seeing Christianity as sort of the antagonist. I guess it's just their story of being a conjure woman, what it means to be them, the things they try to do, what is actually there, and their experiences as someone doing this. I thought it was a really beautiful story. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was really well told by the author. This is her first book ever. I give it 4 out of 5 stars. Overall, the magical realism is there. It's not always clear how much of it is going to be actual magic versus, as opposed to something like more hypothetical. The point is more to understand how they approach the world, how they handle these situations. I felt like focusing on these 2 stories were really well done, because a lot of times when you have these multiple perspective family narratives, I feel like it's really easy to get lost in the details, while having it like this, where it's just before the war and just after the war, from these 2 mother-daughter scenario, keeps it really well connected in a way that's really grounded and easy to understand and enjoy. Basically, where it walks the line of simplicity and complexity in just the right way. I do feel like there are still some details that I'm missing, like fully understanding how all the different plot lines came together, which there were some revelations towards the end that I don't think I quite grasped every single point there. So I kind of do want to reread this, and I might end up doing that. But overall, it was a really enjoyable experience. I was very happy with just how much I enjoyed reading it. I recommend it to anyone who enjoys magical realism and historical fiction. I know I sometimes have a hit or miss experience with historical fiction. And I do think that's usually the particular setting, like Victorian, European type settings, don't always work for me, especially war settings. And war is definitely not a big part of this. They reference the Civil War that is very present, but it's much more to do with the human interactions in this setting of the Civil War. On top of that, I thought the characters were really well done. All of our characters are protagonists or antagonists. They were all very well thought out. They had good depth. They were not one-dimensional, as like with the apartment. None of them were perfect. None of them were as problematic as we thought. They all were very nuanced and really just trying their best, which I really enjoyed. Again, 4 out of 5 stars. Highly recommend. So that concludes these 3 ARC reviews. I hope you enjoyed at least one of them. Let me know if you've read any of them, or if you're interested in reading any of them now that you've heard me talk about them. As always, stay safe, stay inside, and wash your hands. Bye.